to Sophie Tananbaum. The story is by Raphael, Bob-Waksberg, and Miles.
Saw you on the Manhattan-bound Brooklyn Q train. I was wearing a blue-striped t-shirt and a pair of maroon pants. You were wearing a vintage red skirt and a smart white blouse. We both wore glasses. I guess we still do. He got on at the cab and sat across from me, and we made eye contact briefly. I fell in love with you a little bit, in that stupid way where you completely make up a fictional version of the person you're looking at and fall in love with that person. But still, I think there was something there. Several times we looked at each other and then looked away. I tried to think of something to say to you. Maybe pretend I didn't know where I was going and ask you for directions, or say something nice about your boot-shaped earrings, or just say, hot day. It all seemed so stupid. At one point, I caught you staring at me, and you immediately averted your eyes. You pulled a book out of your bag and started reading it, a biography of Lyndon Johnson, but I noticed you never once turned a page. My stop was Union Square, but at Union Square I decided to stay on, rationalizing that I could just as easily transfer to the 7 at 42nd Street, but then I didn't get off at 42nd Street either. You must have missed your stop as well, because when we got all the way to the end of the line at Ditmars, we both just sat there in the car, waiting. I cocked my head at you inquisitively. You shrugged and held up your book as if that was the reason. Still, I said nothing. We took the train all the way back down through Astoria, across the East River, weaving through Midtown, from Times Square to Herald Square to Union Square, under Soho and Chinatown, up across the bridge, back into Brooklyn, past Barclays and Prospect Park, past Flatbush and Midwood and Sheepshead Bay, all the way to Coney Island. And when we got to Coney Island, I knew I had to say something. Still, I said nothing. And so we went back up and down the queue line over and over. We caught the rush hour crowds and then saw them thin out again. We watched the sunset over Manhattan as we crossed the East River. I gave myself deadlines. I'll talk to her before Newkirk. I'll talk to her before Canal. Still, I remained silent. For months, we sat on the train saying nothing to each other. We survived on bags of Skittles sold to us by kids raising money for their basketball teams. We must have heard 1 million mariachi bands, had our faces nearly kicked in by 100,000 breakdancers. I gave money to the beggars until I ran out of singles. When the train went above ground, I'd get text messages and voicemails. Where are you? What happened? Are you okay? Until my phone ran out of battery. I'll talk to her before daybreak. I'll talk to her before Tuesday. The longer I waited, the harder it got. What could I possibly say to you now that we've passed the same station for the 100th time? Maybe if I could go back to the first time the queue switched over to the local R line for the weekend, I could have said, well, this is inconvenient. But I couldn't very well say it now, could I? I would kick myself for days after every time you sneezed. Why hadn't I said bless you? That tiny gesture could have been enough to pivot us into a conversation. But here in stupid silence still we sat. We were the only two souls in the car, perhaps even on the whole train. And even then I felt self-conscious about bothering you. She's reading her book, I thought. She doesn't want to talk to me. Still, there were moments when I felt a connection. Someone would shout something crazy about Jesus and we'd immediately look at each other to register our reactions. A couple of teenagers would exit holding hands and we'd both think, young love. For 60 years we sat in that car just barely pretending not to notice each other. I got to know you so well, if only peripherally. I memorized the folds of your body, the contours of your face, the patterns of your breath. I saw you cry once after you'd glanced at a neighbor's newspaper. I wondered if you were crying about something specific or just the general passage of time, so unnoticeable until suddenly noticeable. I wanted to comfort you, wrap my arms around you, assure you I knew everything would be fine, but it felt too familiar. I stayed glued to my seat. One day, in the middle of the afternoon, you stood up as the train pulled into Queensboro Plaza. It was difficult for you, the simple task of standing up. You hadn't done it in 60 years. Holding on to the rails, you managed to get yourself to the door. You hesitated briefly there, perhaps waiting for me to say something, giving me one last chance to stop you, but rather than spit out a lifetime of suppressed, almost conversations, I said nothing, and I watched you slip out between the closing, sliding doors. It took me a few more stops before I realized you were really gone. I kept waiting for you to re-enter the subway car, sit down next to me, rest your head on my shoulder. Nothing would be said. Nothing would need to be said. When the train returned to Queensboro Plaza, I craned my neck as we entered the station. Perhaps you were there, on the platform, still waiting. Perhaps I would see you smiling and bright, your long gray hair waving in the wind from the oncoming train. But no, you were gone. And I realized most likely I would never see you again. And I thought about how amazing it is that you can know somebody for 60 years and yet still not know that person